Welcome students. I invite you to the new world of culture. Every one of us are familiar with the term culture, and we know that we know everything about culture and especially the culture in which we are living. But there are much more to learn about culture from sociological point of view. In the earlier classes, I said that sociology is the subject that studies social interaction and human behavior. Then, do men interact and behave in their own ways without any regulations? No. In spite of the uniqueness of human personality, the behavior patterns are taught and guided only by the cultural norms, so that a certain degree of conformity is maintained. Therefore, culture is an important social component, and that is what we are going to learn today. So, in this class, I am going to explain to you what we mean by culture, some definitions of culture, the characteristic features of culture, and the broad categories of culture. The first one is, what is culture? Culture distinguishes human society from animal world. Culture is the extraordinary feature of human society. Every individual is born in a society which has its own culture. As the man grows from childhood to adulthood, he learns the cultural norms and values of his own society. His personality is shaped by his own cultural values. Every man in a society adheres to his own culture, by way of which there is a subtle control over the behaviors of the individual members. Culture prescribes the ways of behavior, the customs, religious beliefs, traditions of his own society, morals, and even his language. Culture is manifest in two ways, the ideal culture and the real culture. The approved cultural patterns, practices and beliefs that are strictly prescribed by the social life are included under the ideal culture. The other one is referred to as the real culture. This includes the actual situations in which the social phenomena are taking place. As technological changes take place, certain cultural practices may not be followed by the people. For example, going to the temple on religious days is prescribed by Indian culture, but it may not be followed by some people who are on official tour. Another example is women wearing pants when they go to work, while wearing sari is the culturally prescribed mode of dressing. The one is ideal and the other one is practical. This indicates the real cultural condition vary from the ideal culture. Cultural elements are shared by members of society, and it facilitates cooperation and communication between the members. Culture provides common context in which its members live together. Cultural norms are the rules of behavior. For example, leaving the footwear outside the temple among Hindus, women covering the head in church, sitting posture of Muslims in the mosque explain how culture expects people to behave in a particular fashion under a particular condition. Cultural values vary across societies. For instance, calling teachers by their names is a common practice in the Western culture. It is not considered to be a disrespect, but in India, the teachers have to be respected in all ways as gurus. Culture provides guidelines to its people like this. In the next part, I am going to explain some definitions of culture. According to McIver and Page, culture is the realm of style, values, emotional attachments and intellectual adventures. It is the entire social heritage. For Tyler, culture is the way of life shared by a group of people. It includes the knowledge, beliefs, values, rules or laws, language, customs, symbols and material products within a society that help meeting human needs. For Malinowski, the explanation is very simple. He defines culture as the cumulative creation of man. Robert Bierstedt regards culture as the complex whole that consists of all the ways we think, we do and everything we have as members of society. Now, I hope students you have a better understanding of the term culture. Now, I will explain to you the characteristic features of culture. The concept of culture is really abstract. In order to understand it, it is important to study its features. The first feature is that culture is learnt. Men are socialized in a cultural environment. Culture is handed over from one generation to another and thus the tradition is preserved. Once born into a society, the individual learns its cultural norms. It is the learnt way of behavior, that is, culture is the learnt way of behavior. Man learns the cultural behaviors initially within the family and then through the external social world. For example, a child learning to eat with hands or with spoons or with the chopstick have their own roots in the culture. The second feature is culture is social. Culture is a product of society. It originates and is developed within a social context. It does not exist in isolation. Culture is the unique feature of human society. Man becomes a social being only by learning cultural norms and values. Culture helps man to develop human qualities in a human environment. The overall function of culture is to make society stable and consistent. For example, human etiquette in wedding parties is inculcated by the cultural norms. In wedding parties, we are expected to behave in a particular fashion at different rituals of the wedding. At one point, we are very informal, we celebrate it by dancing and singing, but under certain other rituals, we have to be very serene, chanting mantras and be calm. So, all these behaviors are taught to us by our cultural values. The mode of worshipping God in a temple is also a cultural behavior that could be quoted as an example. Thirdly, culture is transmitted from generation to generation. The societies are stable because the culture of each society is being transmitted from one generation to the next. The family and other social institution pass the culturally prescribed traits to the growing children. Transmission of culture takes place by instructions from elders and also by imitation of the child. In this respect, language plays an important role. For example, the father instructing a son to obey traffic rules, and another example, the child keenly watching his sisters and learning to dress up. Fourth characteristic feature is that culture is shared. The main function of culture is to make all the members in a society to share certain behaviors and norms, so that the social life is acceptable to each other. In this way, the cultural qualities and beliefs are shared by the members of that particular society. The values, traditions, ideas, morals and practices are shared by the people of a society. Robert Bierstedt says that culture is something adopted, used, believed, practiced or possessed by more than one person. It depends upon group life for its existence. Fifthly, culture is integrated. Culture consists of many elements within itself. All these elements are interrelated. There is no contradiction between the elements. The value system is very closely related to the moral aspects and customs, which in turn is rooted in the tradition and religion. The status of Indian women could be quoted as an example. The Hindu religion places women or the wife in the secondary position to men in all rituals. In all rituals, men's role is dominant. This feature of men being dominant and women playing the secondary role is reflected in the women abuse, restrictions on women and widowhood. Women are refrained from education and economic freedom. All these different aspects of culture are interrelated. The sixth feature is culture is cumulative and dynamic. Culture is the integral part of any society at all times. It exists in all periods. It is being handed over from generation to generation, as I said earlier, but this does not mean that culture is static and stable without any alterations. When culture is transmitted through generations, it grows with new elements being added to it according to the new situations. Many elements of culture get modified gradually when there is a need. New items are also included to the existing culture. In this way, culture is cumulative. For example, traditional cultural practices like kolam that finds a new dimension in rangoli in the modern days. Then new dressing pattern that we find in these social situations. Then using modern technology to cook traditional food, and also new form of Indian fast food that have become part of Indian culture now. So, culture is also responsive to the changing conditions and hence it is dynamic and adaptive. Seventh point, culture is gratifying. Culture provides guidelines to its people, how one has to perform a role, what should be the appropriate cultural goal, and what morality to adopt are prescribed by culture. Culture also decides how people should be placed at different social positions, whom one should marry, and how to perform religious duties. Without these rules being taught to the individuals, there will be chaos in the social life. When culture prescribes all these patterns and puts certain taboo on certain types of behavior, everything goes on smoothly. All aspects of human life are regulated because of culture. For instance, in South India, cross cousin marriages are the preferred way of partner selection, while in the North India, total exogamy is adopted. This is the cultural guideline adopted by people. Eighth one, culture varies from society to society. Every society differs in its cultural tradition. Depending on the historical background and geographic locations, cultures develop. Based on these two factors, the philosophy, practices, dressing pattern, food habits and values differ between social groups. In the coastal areas, fishing and fish eating is a common cultural practice. The tribal culture is different from the coastal culture. In tribal areas, their dressing pattern, their practices of worshipping gods, their leadership, everything differs from the coastal culture. European culture is different from Chinese tradition, but in the modern days, with increasing trend in globalization, improving transportation and communication system, a global culture is evolving. The information technology has created a tremendous change in the social lives of the people. There is importing of knowledge, information from one society to another society within no time. So, the behavioral pattern, that even the thought processes are changing, which makes the differences narrowing down. With this, we complete the characteristic features of culture. Now, I will explain to you the broad differentiation of culture. Culture could be broadly differentiated in two ways for a better understanding. They are material culture and non-material culture. In all societies, these two aspects could be distinguished. The first one is material culture. On visiting any society, what is more obvious is their material culture. Material culture consists of all the man-made objects that we could touch and see. They are the artifacts of life. It includes, that is, the material culture includes the housing pattern, furniture, automobiles, jewelry and technology. The material culture is concerned with the external, mechanical and the utilitarian objects. The material culture includes service providing units like telephone and televisions also. The second one is non-material culture. Non-material culture refers to all the abstract subjective, ideological and non-material aspects of culture. These aspects are internal and intrinsically valuable. Non-material culture includes customs, habits, rituals, folkways, modes and language of a particular society. Non-material culture refers to invisible and intangible parts of culture. This part of culture is considered to be more valuable, but more static. Non-material culture is complex. It is comprised of beliefs, values, norms and language. The value a tribal man has for trees cannot be changed at all. Another example is the attachment the Toda men have for buffaloes. These are the cores of those cultures. The other components of non-material culture are folkways, mores, sanctions and taboos. At this point, students, I will differentiate between the folkways and mores. Folkways are conventional behaviors, while mores are morally significant behaviors. Violation of folkways are criticized very badly in the society, whereas violation of mores are felt to be very serious and considered to be immoral. Folkways have public opinion, whereas mores are the desired behavior and it tells us the matters of right and wrong. These are the differences between folkways and mores. Till now, I explained to you the characteristic features of culture, which helped you to understand the term culture in a better fashion, but culture also performs certain functions. The functions of culture will be explained to you now. The first function is that culture provides our behavior pattern. Secondly, culture decides our status in society. Thirdly, culture molds human personality. Fourthly, culture explains and preserves our tradition. The fifth function of culture is to define situations. And lastly, culture helps develop attitudes and values. What all I taught to you in this class, I hope has given you a better understanding of culture. To sum up, in this class, first I explained to you the term culture, then I gave you some definitions of culture, then I explained to you the characteristic features of culture, which includes culture is learnt, culture is social, culture is transmitted from generation to generation, culture is shared, culture is integrated, culture is cumulative and dynamic, culture varies from society to society. After that, I explained to you some of the functions of culture, and finally, I differentiated between the two aspects of culture, the material and non-material culture. Now, students, I will ask you some questions. What is culture? Explain the difference between folkways and mores. What are the functions of culture? Now, students, I have explained to you the first part of culture. In the next class, I will be teaching you few more aspects of culture. Till then, bye.